Adjunct Professor Moran, Microeconomics 112. And in the next few videos, we're going to be discussing something called externalities, also known as spillovers. This is when the cost or benefit of good or service is received by a third party to the transaction, not the supplier or demand. So in economics, we have, let's take a supply and demand graph. Price and quantity. In economics, we want all the benefits of a product to accrue only to the person demanding, the buyer. And we want all the profit or loss to accrue to the seller, the person supplying the information. So there are only two people in the market, the buyer and the seller. But occasionally, part of the transaction leaks out from the market into a third party. That leakage could either be negative, something is bad happening to the person not involved in the transaction, or it could be positive. A negative would be pollution, for example. So a buyer buys coal, a buyer buys electricity made from a coal-firing plant, and the seller gets the payment. The buyer gets the benefit of buying cheap electricity because the seller has not had to scrub the emissions, and so pollutants are entering into the air. And a third party to the transaction who didn't enjoy the low-cost electricity is being harmed, maybe with emphysema. Okay. A positive transaction, oddly enough, the most commonly used example of a positive externality is herd immunity. It's for example, if many people get vaccinated, those people are the buyers, and they get, the benefit of being vaccinated. The seller gets the profit from selling it. But these people who are outside the transaction are less likely to get infected because so many other people have been inoculated, and so they get a positive benefit from transactions they haven't participated in. And the government's responsibility in these cases would be to correct the negative or positive externality and shove all the costs and benefits back into the transaction. And that's what we're going to be studying. We're going to study a little bit about these positive and negative externalities, how they affect the price and market quantity, and then different ways the government can correct for this. Okay, so negative externality is going to result in an overproduction. There will be too much produced because not all the costs are involved included in the transaction. So if this is if the government was able to put the cost of cleaning the pollution up back into the cost of the good, if you remember from our discussion of supply and demand earlier in the course, anything that affects the cost of production will shift the supply curve. And so if you increase the cost of producing this item by making the companies clean up their pollution, then their costs go up and the supply curve will shift back this way. So this is quantity unregulated, and this is quantity government regulation. So here's price unregulated, and here's price regulated. And so you can see that unregulated, there is more produced. That's what we mean when we say that there is an over-allocation when there is a negative externality. So the question becomes how to stuff those costs back into the transaction to get the optimal amount, right, of this good. And that's considered the optimal amount because now you've corrected the externality. All the costs are pushed back into the transaction borne by the buyer and seller. Now, when there's a positive externality, there's going to be an underallocation of goods to that product, underallocation of resources, and not enough will be produced. So let's take an example of that. So here's our supply and demand graph, quantity and price. And here, not enough people are taking the vaccination, for example. And if you compelled everybody to take the vaccination, then either the supply would increase or the demand would increase. There's two ways of doing this. Either way, though, the graph will show that there is an underallocation. So here's quantity unregulated, here's quantity regulated. This is price unregulated, this is price regulated. Quantity unregulated, quantity regulated. Price unregulated, price regulated. Yeah, you can either encourage businesses to produce more of this underallocated good, or you can encourage consumers to buy more. And the difference, as we're going to see again later, is that if you, theoretically, not necessarily in reality, theoretically, if you give a subsidy to a business to produce more, because it lowers business costs, theoretically that supply curve shifts to the right and the price will drop and you'll get the correct quantity, where all the benefits accrue only to the buyers and the costs accrue to the sellers. But if you increase demand, maybe by giving a voucher to customers that they can redeem at a supplier, then the increase in demand would theoretically increase the price of the good, but you will still get the correct quantity. So you can see here the goal is to, there is not enough produced. There's only this much produced, and so that's why this is called an underallocation of resources, because the goal is to push it back out this way, and in this example everybody gets a shot, and so the quantity supplied and demanded increases. Positive externalities. Okay, graphing positive and negative externalities. Not all costs are captured in the marketplace. The additional cost of cleanup pollution, for example, is paid by the community. Since the supply curve equals the marginal cost curve, the marginal cost curve is too low because not all the costs are borne by the producer. And okay, so that represents this lower, or this supply curve. Where there is an over-allocation because not all the costs are stuffed into the transaction. So we have to increase this guy's costs by making them pay for the pollution and shifting the supply curve back to the left. Positive externality, and so unregulated results in a lower price and over-allocation for that good. And as we just discussed, a positive externality, some benefits accrue to people not in the transaction, and these people enjoy benefits but are not paying. So it results in it's going to result in not enough demand for the product, and so we need to encourage everybody to get in the market to earn the benefits in a transaction. Okay, so now we can in the next, there are various ways of correcting an externality. A negative externality results in an over-allocation. It's too much. So there's a thing called individual bargaining, Coase theorem, and we're going to have a worksheet on that. We're going to do a worksheet on that. And that's where you get the government's not involved, and the people who are negatively impacted go to the supplier and negotiate and pay that person as a subsidy to not pollute. Yeah, that's we'll get there. Liability in lawsuits. If someone's injured, they can sue the company and win damages and in civil court, and those damages have the effect of increasing costs and shifting the supply curve to the left and fixing the over-allocation. Of course, the damage is done. The government can place a tax on producers, and that would increase their costs and shift the supply curve to the left and end the over-allocation. There are direct controls. The government could just say you can only put this many pollutants into the air or this much pollutants into the water, and the business would have to buy equipment to make sure they complied with government regulations, and those extra costs would theoretically cut down on. Those additional costs would increase the business costs and shift the supply curve to the left and fix the over-allocation. Okay, or you can create a market for externality, which If one producer is doing very efficient, has modern equipment, not polluting, and they're under the limits set by the government, they could sell the pollution they haven't done to a less efficient company, and that would drive up that business's costs, and it would give them an incentive to buy modern, less polluting equipment. And the 70s were direct controls when they started regulating, like the Environmental Protection Agency. They started fixing pollution, and today it seems that the economy is going more in this market for externalities, which allows some companies to pollute more than they can, as long as they buy the rights from a more efficient company. All right. Now, spillover benefits resulted in underallocation of resources to a good. You could give a subsidy to individuals, and then it lowers their costs, so they're more likely to get the transaction. Or you could give the subsidy to the producers, and that lowers their costs and should shift the supply curve to the right. Okay. Now there's going to be an optimal amount of pollution cleanup, and we're going to do a worksheet on that. Believe it or not, economically at least, you don't want to clean up all pollution. You want to clean up pollution until marginal cost equals marginal benefit, and we'll demonstrate that in a later video.